Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into the pretty amazing world of game localization. We're going to figure out how a game made halfway across the world can be transformed to feel like it was built from the ground up just for you.
So a lot of us have seen this, right? The famously bad translations that became absolute legends. This one, of course, became a massive internet meme. It's kind of the perfect example of what happens when localization goes horribly wrong.
So, how did we get from that to the incredibly polished, seamless experiences we all expect today? Well, the answer is in a field that goes way, way beyond just swapping out words. Let's get into it.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We'll start with the industry's blueprint for going global, this thing called the GILT framework. Then we'll get into the really creative stuff, the art of adapting games. After that, we'll uncover some of the huge challenges localizers face. And finally, take a look at where this is all headed.
To solve that whole all-your-base problem and really professionalize the process, the industry had to come up with a system, a way to make sure games are ready for a worldwide audience right from the very beginning.
And at the heart of it all is this concept, game localization, or GameLoc for short. And look, it is so much more than just language. We're talking about adapting everything, date formats, currencies, cultural jokes, even symbols, all to make the game feel completely at home in a new country. And the way they do it is with a GILT framework. Now, what's really important to notice here is the order. See how internationalization comes before localization? That's the secret sauce. It means developers design the game from the ground up to be flexible so that adding new languages or cultural content later doesn't break the whole thing. It's a huge shift from it being an afterthought to being a core part of development.
So now that we have the technical framework down, let's dive into what's often the most creative and honestly the most difficult part of the job: adapting the actual content of the game. So to do this, professionals use two key approaches. Think of culturalization as a defensive shield. It's all about adopting content so it doesn't clash with local political, social, or religious norms. But then you have transcreation, which is more like a creative transformation. Its main goal is the player's emotional experience, even if it means totally rewriting the original script to get the right feel. A fantastic example of transcreation comes from Final Fantasy. There's a sword with this incredibly beautiful, poetic Japanese name that basically means the beauty of nature. So what do they call it in English? Painkiller. Why? Because a literal translation just wouldn't land. The goal was to communicate the weapon's raw power and a bit of that edgy humor to preserve the feeling of using it in the game.
And then for culturalization, take a look at Fire Emblem Fates. There was a scene in the original game where a character's drink gets spiked. This raised some pretty serious concerns over here in the West. So, to avoid controversy and just adapt to different social norms, Nintendo completely rewrote and changed the context of that scene for the US release. It's a perfect example of publishers actively managing cultural sensitivities.
So even with a solid plan and these really clever, creative approaches, the actual day-to-day process is filled with some massive, often invisible challenges that make the job incredibly tough. The number one biggest problem, by far, is a total lack of context. You see, translators almost never get to actually play the game they're working on. Instead, they just get a giant spreadsheet with thousands of lines of dialogue, completely out of order, with no idea who's speaking, what the situation is, or even what the tone should be.
This analogy just perfectly captures how hard their job is. It's not just about words. They have to reconstruct the entire emotion, the story, the character intent, all from these tiny fragmented pieces. It's a huge creative challenge.
And on top of that, just look at the sheer range of knowledge they need. One week, a localizer might be working on a flight simulator and needs to know deep aviation jargon. The very next week, they could be on a fantasy RPG that requires incredible storytelling skills. They have to be experts in completely different fields, sometimes all at once.
So, with all these insane complexities, how is the industry adapting? How are they evolving to meet all these challenges? Let's take a look at where things are going.
I mean, the industry has come a really long way from its early ad hoc days. But the single most important change has been the shift to what's called the sim ship model. That's simultaneous worldwide release. This means localization isn't something that happens after the game is done anymore. It happens right alongside development, which creates a ton of pressure, but also makes it a much more integrated part of the whole creative process. And looking ahead, there are four big trends really changing the game. The largest shift is toward a user-centered approach, where the player's experience is the absolute top priority. But we're also seeing way more involvement from fan communities,
new tech like AI making its way in, and a much-needed growing focus on accessibility for all players. So let's pull this all together. What we've seen is that game localization is this incredible mix of tech, culture, and pure creativity. You've got the JILT framework providing the structure, but the real magic happens in the artful adaptation, through culturalization and transcreation. And it's a field full of huge challenges, like that killer lack of context, all while the industry is pushing toward a future that's more about the user, more collaborative, and way more high-tech.
And all this leaves us with one last big question to think about. With passionate fan communities often creating their own amazing translations and AI tools getting scarily good, what does the future hold for the official professional localizer? That's a question the entire industry is trying to figure out right now.